Welcome to Serial Killer Files by Skoob, where we explore the most chilling cases that reveal the hidden depths of the human mind. I'm your host, Arthur Morgan, and today we're diving into one of the most haunting child murder cases in American history. A story that unfolded over 13 years, claiming 9 innocent lives, all while hiding behind the mask of maternal grief and medical tragedy. This is the story of Marybeth Tinning, a suburban mother whose name would become synonymous with one of the most shocking patterns of infanticide ever documented. For over a decade, child after child died under her care, each death seemingly explainable, each loss met with community sympathy, until the horrifying truth finally emerged. Before we delve into the darkness, let's understand who Marybeth Tinning really was. Born Marybeth Rowe on September 11, 1942, in the small town of Duanesburg, New York, she appeared to be the epitome of ordinary American life. In the mid-1960s, she married Joseph Tinning, and by all outward appearances, they were living the suburban dream in Schenectady, New York. Marybeth worked in jobs that required trust and care. She was a school bus driver, responsible for children's safety, and a nursing assistant caring for the sick and vulnerable. The irony is chilling when you consider what we now know. She had access to medical knowledge, understood symptoms and emergency procedures, and was trusted by her community as someone who cared for others. But behind this facade of normalcy lurked something far more sinister. Between 1972 and 1985, 9 children would die under Marybeth Tinning's care, each one before reaching their 5th birthday. 9 lives cut short in ways that would initially be explained away by medical professionals and authorities as tragic coincidences. What makes this case particularly disturbing is how long it took for anyone to recognize the pattern. In an era when medical knowledge about infant death was still developing, when SIDS was used as an explanation for unexplained infant deaths, Marybeth Tinning operated in the shadows of medical uncertainty. Our story begins on a cold December day in 1971. Marybeth and Joseph already had 2 children, Barbara and Joseph Jr., when Marybeth gave birth to their 3rd child on December 26th. They named her Jennifer, perhaps hoping this Christmas baby would bring joy to their family. But Jennifer's story was tragic from the very beginning. Born at St. Clair's Hospital with devastating medical problems, hemorrhagic meningitis, and multiple brain abscesses that had developed before birth, she never had a chance at life. For 8 agonizing days, this tiny infant fought a battle she could never win. On January 3, 1972, Jennifer died. The official cause of death was acute meningitis. To everyone involved, the doctors, the nurses, the family, the community, this was simply a heartbreaking medical tragedy. These things happened. Infants were sometimes born with severe infections that proved fatal. There was nothing suspicious about it. But here's where the story takes on a more sinister tone when viewed through the lens of what we now know. Some forensic experts later suggested that Jennifer's condition might not have been entirely natural. Dr. Michael Baden, a renowned forensic pathologist, later noted that Jennifer's injuries looked suspicious, possibly the result of an unsafe attempt to induce labor, perhaps to make the baby arrive on Christmas Day. The reaction to Jennifer's death set a pattern that would repeat itself 8 more times over the next 13 years. Marybeth was surrounded by sympathy and attention. Neighbors brought casseroles, relatives offered condolences, and the community rallied around this grieving mother who had suffered such an unimaginable loss. But there were subtle signs that something wasn't quite right. Maternity ward nurses and some neighbors later reported that Marybeth didn't display the kind of visible grief they might have expected. She wasn't crying or showing the emotional devastation that typically accompanies such a profound loss. At the time, these observations didn't trigger any official concern, but they would later be remembered as early red flags. The most chilling aspect of Jennifer's death is how it established the template for everything that would follow. The medical emergency, the rush to the hospital, the ultimate tragedy, and then the flood of attention and sympathy directed at Marybeth. For someone who may have craved that attention, Jennifer's death might have revealed a terrible truth: that tragedy could make her the center of everyone's concern and care. What happened next defies all odds and statistical probability. Within weeks of losing Jennifer, the Tinning family was struck by another devastating blow. On January 20th, 1972, just 17 days after Jennifer's death, 2-year-old Joseph Jr. died. Marybeth told doctors that Joseph had suffered a seizure and choked on his own vomit. The hospital examined him, found nothing obviously wrong, and sent him home. But hours later, Marybeth was racing back to the emergency room with Joseph in her arms. This time, he was dead on arrival. The official cause: cardiac arrest. 2 children dead within weeks of each other. The medical community and the family were stunned, but they still saw this as an impossibly tragic coincidence rather than something sinister. But the nightmare wasn't over. On March 1st, 1972, Marybeth rushed her daughter Barbara, nearly 5 years old, to the same hospital. Barbara had gone into convulsions, lost consciousness, and died the following day. The doctors attributed her death to Reye syndrome, a rare condition affecting the liver and brain that was often diagnosed when no clear cause of death could be determined. Think about this for a moment. In just over 2 months, Marybeth Tinning had lost 3 children. The statistical probability of this happening naturally is virtually impossible. Yet because each death was attributed to a different medical condition, nobody saw a pattern worth investigating. The deaths continued with horrifying regularity. In late 1973, Marybeth gave birth to Timothy. On December 10th, when Timothy was just 3 weeks old, she found him lifeless in his crib. The cause was listed as SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome. 2 years later, 5-month-old Nathan was found dead. Marybeth arrived at St. Clair's Hospital holding Nathan in her arms, claiming he had stopped breathing in the car. Again, the death was recorded as natural causes. The pattern was becoming undeniable, yet still, nobody connected the dots. Each death was treated as a separate tragedy. Each loss met with renewed sympathy for this incredibly unlucky mother. In 1978, something interesting happened. The Tinnings adopted a baby boy named Michael, and Marybeth also gave birth to Mary Frances in October. The adoption of Michael would later prove crucial to the investigation because it eliminated the possibility that these deaths were caused by some genetic disorder affecting only the Tinning bloodline. Mary Frances died in January 1979 after being found unconscious. Jonathan followed in March 1980 after an unexplained collapse that left him on life support for 4 weeks. And then Michael, the adopted child, died in February 1981 after allegedly falling down the stairs and suffering a concussion that proved fatal. With Michael's death, any theory about genetic causes was eliminated, but still, incredibly, authorities didn't launch an investigation. Each death was still being treated as a separate, tragic event. For over a decade, Marybeth Tinning had operated in a space where medical uncertainty and professional assumptions created the perfect cover for her crimes. But that protection was about to crumble with the death of her 9th child. On December 20th, 1985, 4-month-old Tammy Lynn died. By this point, the Tinning family's tragic history was well known in the local medical community. When Marybeth called her neighbor in a panic, saying the baby wasn't breathing, there was an electric sense of dread in the air. Paramedics arrived to find Tammy Lynn unresponsive on a changing table. She was pronounced dead at the scene, but this time, something was different. Unlike the earlier deaths, authorities ordered a thorough autopsy and laboratory tests. The results changed everything. Tammy Lynn had died from asphyxia. She had been smothered. There was no medical condition, no genetic disorder, no tragic coincidence. This was murder. Finally, after 9 deaths spanning 13 years, law enforcement began to look at the entire pattern. The Schenectady Police Department and New York State Police compiled hospital records, autopsy reports, and medical histories of all 9 children. For the first time, officials were reviewing the sequence of deaths as a whole rather than as separate incidents. The shift in perspective was dramatic. As one medical examiner later reflected, "If anyone is negligent, I suppose I am. I probably should have said, there must be more to it than this. But we all think, and don't do." This quote perfectly captures how the medical establishment had failed to recognize what was happening right in front of them. Forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Baden applied what became known as Meadows' Law to the case. 1 sudden infant death is a tragedy, 2 is suspicious, and 3 is murder until proved otherwise. By this standard, the Tinning deaths should have triggered investigation years earlier. The community's reaction was one of shock and disbelief. Neighbors who had offered sympathy and support through each tragedy suddenly found themselves questioning everything they thought they knew about Marybeth Tinning. The woman they had seen as incredibly unlucky was now suspected of being a cold-blooded killer. In early 1986, Marybeth Tinning was brought to the state police station for questioning about Tammy Lynn's death. What happened in that interrogation room would finally reveal the truth about 13 years of tragedy. Initially, Marybeth denied any wrongdoing. "I didn't do it," she repeated when confronted with suspicions about Tammy Lynn's death. But after hours of persistent questioning, her defenses began to crumble. Finally, she broke down and confessed. She admitted to smothering Tammy Lynn with a pillow, but her reasoning was chilling. "I smothered them each with a pillow because I'm not a good mother, because of the other children." She also confessed to killing Timothy and Nathan in the same manner. Her description of the night Tammy Lynn died provides a disturbing window into her mindset. "I got up and went to her crib. I finally used the pillow because she was always crying and I couldn't do anything right." This confession revealed something crucial about Marybeth's psychological state. She wasn't acting out of simple malice or hatred toward her children. Instead, her actions seemed driven by deep feelings of inadequacy as a mother, combined with an inability to cope with the normal stresses of child-rearing, like crying babies. But there was another layer to her motivation that experts would later identify. After each death, Marybeth became the center of attention and sympathy. She received an outpouring of support from family, friends, and the community. For someone with deep psychological needs for validation and attention, these tragic events may have provided a twisted form of emotional satisfaction. In July 1987, a jury in Schenectady County convicted Marybeth Tinning of second-degree murder for Tammy Lynn's death. Prosecutors described her actions as reflecting a depraved indifference to human life, and she was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. Although she was only formally convicted of killing Tammy Lynn, law enforcement continued to suspect her in the deaths of all 8 other children. However, because the earlier deaths had originally been attributed to medical causes, rather than foul play, prosecutors couldn't secure additional convictions due to lack of evidence. As investigators and psychologists examined Marybeth Tinning's case, a complex psychological profile began to emerge. Many experts believe her behavior exhibited signs of Munchausen syndrome by proxy, now called factitious disorder imposed on another, a rare psychological condition where a caregiver induces or fabricates illness in someone they care for to gain attention, sympathy, or emotional support. The pattern fits disturbingly well. Marybeth repeatedly brought her children to doctors and hospitals with dramatic descriptions of sudden illnesses or seizures that only she had witnessed. She narrated these medical crises to staff, family, and neighbors, always positioning herself as the devoted, concerned mother fighting to save her child. After each death, she became the focus of intense community sympathy and support. At funerals, she was surrounded by people offering condolences and emotional support. This attention may have satisfied deep psychological needs for validation that weren't being met elsewhere in her life. Marybeth's background as a nursing assistant gave her medical knowledge that would have been crucial to her crimes. She understood symptoms, knew how to describe medical emergencies convincingly, and was familiar with hospital procedures. This knowledge allowed her to present her children's conditions in ways that wouldn't immediately arouse suspicion from medical professionals. During her imprisonment, psychological evaluations revealed disturbing personality traits. Psychiatrists described her as manipulative, attention-seeking, and often lacking genuine remorse. Some evaluations suggested narcissistic tendencies, while others noted traits consistent with borderline personality disorder, including emotional instability and an intense need for attention. What makes Marybeth's case particularly chilling is her ability to maintain a convincing facade of grief and maternal concern, while simultaneously harming her children. This level of deception and manipulation points to sophisticated psychological dysfunction that goes far beyond simple emotional instability. Marybeth Tinning spent over 3 decades in prison at the Bedford Hills Correctional Facility for Women in New York. Throughout her incarceration, she had multiple parole hearings, each providing additional insight into her psychological state and her understanding of her crimes. At a 2011 parole hearing, she told commissioners, "I just lost it," after the deaths of her other children, and that she became a damaged, worthless piece of person who believed her youngest would die too. These statements mix confusion, self-blame, and emotional turmoil. But they also reveal the intense psychological distress that likely shaped her actions. Her statements to parole boards showed a pattern of shifting explanations and varying levels of acceptance of responsibility. Sometimes she admitted guilt, other times she minimized her role or blamed external factors. This inconsistency made it difficult for authorities to assess whether she truly understood the magnitude of her crimes or felt genuine remorse. The case attracted national media attention, with coverage in major newspapers and television programs like 60 Minutes. The public was shocked not only by the crimes themselves, but by how long it took for authorities to recognize the pattern and launch an investigation. Finally, after serving over 30 years, Marybeth Tinning was approved for parole in her 70s. Her release sparked controversy and debate about whether someone who had committed such heinous crimes could ever be safely returned to society. The Marybeth Tinning case exposed critical flaws in how medical professionals and law enforcement agencies handle suspicious child deaths. The fact that 9 children died before anyone launched a serious investigation represents a systemic failure that had tragic consequences. Several factors contributed to this failure. First, medical knowledge about infant death was still developing in the 1970s and early 1980s. SIDS was often used as a catch-all diagnosis for unexplained infant deaths, and genetic disorders were less well understood. This medical uncertainty provided cover for Marybeth's crimes. Second, there was a lack of communication between different agencies and medical facilities. Each death was treated as an isolated incident, and no one was tracking the overall pattern of deaths in the Tinning household. Third, there was a reluctance to suspect a mother of harming her own children. The assumption that maternal instinct would naturally protect children made it difficult for professionals to consider that a mother might be the source of danger. The case also highlighted the importance of recognizing Munchausen syndrome by proxy and similar disorders. Medical professionals needed better training to identify patterns of suspicious symptoms and to question cases where children repeatedly present with unexplained medical emergencies. Since the Tinning case, There have been significant improvements in how suspicious child deaths are investigated. Better communication between agencies, more sophisticated forensic techniques, and increased awareness of disorders like Munchausen syndrome by proxy have made it less likely that such a pattern of deaths could go undetected for so long. The story of Marybeth Tinning isn't just horrifying because of what she did, but because of how long she was allowed to do it. For over a decade, 9 children died, while sympathy, trust, and silence protected the person responsible. A seemingly ordinary mother, a caregiver by profession, hid behind society's deepest assumptions about motherhood and innocence. This case exposes a chilling collision of psychology, medical blind spots, and collective denial, where warning signs were missed, patterns were ignored, and questions went unasked. Today, Marybeth Tinning is a free woman, but the unanswered questions remain. How many chances did the system have to stop this, and why didn't it? What if the truth isn't just about one woman, but about how easily darkness can hide in plain sight? To explore the full timeline, hidden red flags, and psychological layers behind this case, download the Skoob app now and unlock the complete story. There's more beneath the surface, and you won't hear it anywhere else. Until next time, this has been Serial Killer Files.